Eccoci, benvenuti a tutti. Stiamo quasi, scusate. Come state? Dunque, prima di tutto, so che il canale non è stato attivo per un bel po' e non ho niente da dire a riguardo, mi dispiace. Sto per ricominciare, sto per ripartire. Adesso ho anche un nuovo telefono per fare i video, per cui la qualità dovrebbe anche aumentare e sarà più facile farli perché non sarò limitato a 5 minuti per clip quando farò i video in 4K e quindi aspettateli prossimamente. Ecco subito Sigurbit, che è un mio amico eh, che chiede... anche moderatore ti ho messo, mamma mia. Allora, PlayStation 5, il momento che tutti aspettavamo. Oddio, ad essere sincero, guardando i forum su internet ho visto un po' più apatia rispetto al solito riguardo all'arrivo della nuova console questa volta. Di solito la nuova generazione era sempre un motivo di estasi quasi videoludica. Adesso questa volta invece siamo tutti molto più tranquilli, che è un bene, non dico di no, però vediamo. È che sapete, col passare del tempo la potenza di calcolo delle console inevitabilmente, certo, aumenta tanto, ma la differenza nella pratica è sempre meno tra una generazione e l'altra. Ehm, Stiamo aspettando il video sarà trasmesso in anteprima, non in diretta, attenzione, però è capibile perché hanno fatto senza pubblico, essendo per le questioni del coronavirus, chiaramente è giusto che la gente stia a casa. Mi sentite bene intanto? Adesso vedremo anche col volume della live appena inizia se sono ben bilanciati, spero di sì. Dovrebbero essere le stesse impostazioni che ho tenuto l'altra volta e andavano abbastanza bene. Vedremo. Ehm, Dovrebbe uscire a novembre, in teoria. Novembre dovrebbe essere il momento dell'uscita, sia per la PS5 che per l'Xbox Series X. Ehm, Vedremo se questi dubbi sono confermati oggi. Non so se annunceranno la data d'uscita, potrebbero farlo. Potrebbero farlo, ma potrebbero anche non farlo, perché la Sony fino ad adesso per la PS5 ha rilasciato le informazioni abbastanza con il contagocce, una alla volta, molto, molto con calma. Eh, sì, insomma, considerato che siamo in quarantena, noi italiani almeno, è un buon modo per passare la quarantena a guardare l'annuncio della nuova console di Sony. Dunque, dovrebbe iniziare tra poco. Io sto tenendo la pagina qua di YouTube. Non... Allora, sembri Sabaku. Salve a tutti, sono Daniel, conosciuto anche come Itis of the Desert. 15 spettatori intanto, vabbè. Però parlano solo quelli che conosco già. Presentatevi ragazzi, benvenuti, benvenuti. Spero di... cercherò di tradurvi quello che viene detto in inglese per chi di voi non lo capisce abbastanza bene. Bethesda? No, oggi Bethesda non c'è solo Sony. Cioè, parleranno della console. Gli unici giochi di cui sentiremo parlare forse saranno i titoli first party. Come è successo alla presentazione della Play 4, hanno mostrato NEC e Killzone Shadowfall, se non mi ricordo male. E faranno la stessa cosa qui. Principalmente si concentreranno sull'hardware, sui servizi. E sì, parleranno di una, due, massimo tre esclusive. Ciao Danilo, benvenuto. Ma i video, signora Itis? L'ho detto all'inizio, torneranno. Adesso sono messo anche meglio di come ero messo prima, quindi bene così. Io chi sono? Non capisco inglese, volere che va picante. Il Mona si chiama. Vabbè. Il Mona. Spero parlino di Halo Infinite. E infatti, guarda, giusto prima che ero in bagno pensavo Vittorio scriverà 0 su 10 not enough Halo. Se no che cazzo sono qua a fare? Va bene, ringrazio per la risposta, buona giornata. Va bene così. Il mondo è bello perché ha variato. Ok, dovrebbe stare iniziando la live. Ditemi se l'audio va bene, se mi sentite bene, tutto quanto. Passiamo così, che è meglio. Scusate. Ok. Scusate un paio di problemi tecnici. Adesso risolviamo subito, speriamo. Niente. Non so che cavolo succeda. Toccherà vederla così, mi
Hi.
spiace.
Unfortunately, we had to cancel the talk that we had planned for GDC. But we do have some super exciting news about PS5. And who better to bring that to you than the one and only Mark Cerny. Without further ado, over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Jim.
Però il pubblico c'è. Aia.
There will be lots of chances later on this year to look at the PlayStation 5 games. Today, I want to talk a bit about our goals for the PlayStation 5 hardware and how
Okay.
they influenced the development of the console.
Non parleranno dei
I think
giochi
you all
oggi.
know, I'm a big believer in console generations. Once every 5 or 6 or 7 years, a console arrives with substantially new capabilities. There's a lot of learning by the game developers.
Ok, Marceni è un grande credente delle console generation, delle generazioni, quindi
Now, it used to be that as a console designer, you'd somehow intuit what would be the best set of capabilities for the new console, and then build it in complete secrecy. For the PlayStation consoles, that period lasted through PlayStation 3, a powerful and groundbreaking console, but also one that caused quite a lot of heartache, as it was initially difficult to develop games for. So, starting with PlayStation 4, we've taken a different approach, roughly centered around 3 principles. The first of these is listening to the developers, which is to say that a lot of what we put into a console derives directly from the needs and aspirations of the game creators. We definitely do have some ideas of our own, but at the core of our philosophy for designing consoles is that game players are here for the fantastic games, which is to say that game creators matter. Anything we can do to make life easier for the game creators or help them realize their dreams, we will do. So, about once every 2 years, I take a tour of the industry. I go to the various developers and publishers, sit down, and discuss how they're doing with the current consoles and what they'd like to see in future consoles. This requires weeks on the road as reaching the bulk of the game creators involves talking to well over 100 people, something like 24 publishers and developers. And it is incredibly valuable. By the way, the feature most requested by the developers, that was an SSD, which we were very happy to put in the hardware, but a lot of problem solving was required. I'll be doing a deep dive on the SSD and surrounding systems later on in this talk. It's also key to make a generational leap while keeping the console sufficiently familiar to game developers. I think about this in terms of balancing evolution and revolution. Now, with PlayStation 1, 2, and 3, the target was a revolution each time with a brand new feature set. That was great in many ways, but time for the developers to get up and running got longer with each console. In the past, I've called this time to triangle. Here's what I had for those 3 consoles. To be clear, I'm not talking about time to make a game.
Ok,
Developers
qua
will
parla di
be
una cosa
ambitious,
di
and
cui
it may
avevo
take
parlato
them
già
6 years or so
all'inizio
to realize
alla
their
presentazione
vision.
della PS4, ovvero
What I'm talking
il tempo
about
per
is that
triangolare,
dead time before
ovvero
graphics
quanto
and
ci
other
mettono gli
aspects of game
sviluppatori a
development are up
capire
and running,
esattamente
and trying to minimize
come
that.
funziona il
On the other
sistema
hand, if we're trying to
su cui
reduce
mettono le
that dead
mani.
time to 0, that means the hardware architecture can't change at all. We're handcuffed. We need to judge for each feature what value it adds and whether it's worth the increase in developer time needed to support it. So with PlayStation 4, we were able to strike a pretty good balance between performance and familiarity. We got required learning back
Con
to
la
PlayStation 1
4
levels.
sono arrivati a 1 o
With
2 mesi.
PS5, the GPU was definitely the area we felt the most tension between adding new features and keeping a familiar programming model. Ultimately, I think we've ended up with something under a month of getting up to speed. That feels like we're striking about the right balance. I'll go into a bit more detail later today about our philosophy with the GPU and the
Dovresti
specific
sentirmi meglio
feature set
adesso.
that resulted from it.
Ho
It's
abbassato un po' il
also
volume
very
della live.
important for us, as the hardware team, to find new dreams, by which I mean something other than CPU performance, GPU performance, and the amount of RAM. The increase in graphics performance over the past 2 decades has been astonishing, but there are other areas in which we can innovate and provide significant value to the game creators, and through them, the players. That's why the SSD was very much on our list of directions to explore, regardless of what came out of the
Parla
conversations with game developers
dell'SSD.
and publishers. The biggest feature in this category is the custom engine for audio. That's today's final topic. The push for vastly improved audio, and in particular 3D audio, isn't something that came out of the developer meetings. It's much more the case that we had a dream of what might be possible 5 years from now, and then worked out a number of steps we could take to set us on that path. So here again are the 3 principles, the first being enabling the desires of developers to drive the hardware design. To me, the SSD really is the key to the next generation. It's a game changer. And it was the #1 ask from developers for PlayStation
l'SSD è la cosa più
5. As
importante
in,
secondo
we
lui per la
know
nuova
it's probably
generazione.
impossible, but can you put
Ditemi se
an
adesso
SSD in
il
it?
bilanciamento del volume va
That
bene.
was a discussion we were also having internally. It was clear that the presence of a hard drive in every PlayStation 4 was having a positive impact. A lot of things that would simply have been impossible at Blu-ray disc speeds were now possible. At the same time, though, in 2015 and 2016, when we were having these conversations, developers were already banging up against the limits of the hard drive, and a lot of developer time was being spent designing around slow load speeds. I want to focus in on just one number here, which is how long it takes to load a gigabyte of data from a hard drive.
Sto parlando
The difficulty being that hard drives are neither particularly fast nor flexible. If all your data is in one block, which is frankly not very likely, you can load 50 to 100 megabytes a second, depending on where the data is located on the hard drive. Let's assume it's on the outer edge, which means loading a gigabyte takes 10 seconds. If you compress your game packages, you can fit more data on the Blu-ray disc and also effectively boost your hard drive read speed by the compression ratio. We support
Sta parlando
Z-lib decompression on PlayStation 4.
della lentezza
It gets you
del
something
caricare
like
le cose
50%
da
more
un
data
hard
on the
drive,
disk
da un hard
and
drive
50%
meccanico,
higher
diciamo,
effective read speed.
ovvero normale,
Unfortunately,
insomma, quello che
though,
conosciamo
it's
tutti,
highly
quello che c'è nella
likely that your data
PS4.
is scattered around in various files on the hard drive, as well as sourced from multiple locations within those files. So lots of seeks are needed at 2 to 50-ish milliseconds each. My rule of thumb is that the hard drive is spending 2/3 of its time seeking and only 1/3 of its time actually loading data. Putting all of that together, a gigabyte is very roughly 20 seconds to load from a hard drive. Now, A gigabyte is not much data. Games
Allora,
are
ha
using
parlato di
5 or 6
quanto
gigabytes
si
of
sta a
RAM on
caricare un
PlayStation 4,
gigabyte
so
da un hard
boot times
disk
and load times can get
meccanico,
pretty grim.
e ha detto che ci sta
Or
più
to
o
put
meno
that
20
differently,
secondi.
as a player, you wait for the game to boot, wait for the game to load, wait for the level to reload every time you die, and you wait for what is euphemistically called fast travel.
Ed è un problema
And
sia per gli
all of that
sviluppatori
leads
che
to the
devono
dream.
fare del game
What if we
design
could have
attorno a
not just an
questo
SSD,
limite,
but a
che
blindingly
per i
fast
giocatori
SSD?
che
If we could
appunto devono
load
aspettare
5
i
gigabytes a
caricamenti.
second from it, what would change? Now, SSDs are completely different from hard drives. They don't have seeks as such. If you have a 5 gigabyte a second SSD, you can read data from 1,000 different locations in that
Adesso
second,
com'è il volume?
pretty much at speed. As for time to
finalmente
load
sia
a
giusto.
gigabyte, this is next gen we're talking about, so memory is bigger. Instead, we should be asking how long to load 2 gigabytes. And the answer is about a quarter of a second. I mean, that's amazing. We're talking 2 orders of magnitude, meaning very roughly 100
Un
times
quarto di
faster.
secondo per
Which
caricare un
means at 5
gigabyte
gigabytes a second
dall'SSD
for
della
the SSD, the
PS5.
potential is that the
Che
game
ricordiamo
boots
non è
in a
semplicemente
second.
un SSD
There are
qualunque, è un
no load
SSD
screens. The
disegnato
game just
apposta,
fades
progettato
down while
per quel
loading
sistema.
a half dozen gigabytes and fades back up again. Same for a reload. You're immediately back in the action after you die. And fast travel becomes so fast it's blink and you miss it. As game creators, we go from trying to distract the player from how long fast travel is taking, like those Spider-Man subway rides, to being so blindingly fast that we might even have to slow that transition down. Pretty cool, right? But for me,
Veramente non
this
so se
is
sono
not the
cartonati o se
primary
sono
reason
persone
to
vere, mi
change
sembra
from a
che si
hard
muovino un
drive to
po'.
an SSD. The primary reason for an ultra-fast SSD is that it gives the game designer freedom. Or to put that differently, with a hard drive, the 20 seconds that it takes to load a gigabyte can sabotage the game that the developer is trying to create. I think almost all of us in the room have experienced this, maybe in different ways. Say we're making an adventure game and we have 2 rich environments where we each want enough textures and models to fill memory, which you can do as long as you have a long staircase or elevator ride or a windy corridor where you can ditch the old assets and then take 30 seconds or so to load the new assets. Having a 30-second
parla
elevator ride
dei
is a
caricamenti
little
nascosti.
extreme. More realistically, we'd probably chop the world into a number of smaller pieces and then do some calculations with
Con un
sight lines
ascensore
and
che
run
ti
speeds
porta da
like
un
we
punto
did for
all'altro
Haven City when we
per
were making
nascondere i
Jack 2.
caricamenti,
The
ecco.
game is 20 years old, but not much has changed since then. All those twisty passages are there for a reason. There's a whole subset of level design dedicated to this sort of work, but still, it's a giant distraction for a team that just wants to make their game. So when I talked about the dream of an SSD, part of the reason for that 5 gigabyte a second target was to eliminate loads, but also part of the reason for that target was streaming. As in, what if the SSD is so fast that as the player is turning around, it's possible to load textures for everything behind the player in that split
Gibbo
second.
dice, quindi niente più
If you
sei morto
figure
in
that
Dark
it
Souls.
takes half a second to turn, that's
No,
4
però
gigabytes of
almeno
compressed data
i
you can
caricamenti
load.
saranno un po' più
That sounds
veloci.
about right for next gen. Anyway, back to the hard drive. Another strategy for increasing effective read speed is to make big sequential chunks of data. For example,
parlando
we
delle
might
varie
group
tecniche
all the
per-
data together for each city block. That removes
per
most of the
rendere
seeks,
efficienti i
and the streaming
caricamenti
gets
lenti di un
faster.
hard disk
But there's a
o di un
downside too, which is that
disco
frequently
DVD come
used
era
data
nel
is included in
PlayStation
many
2
chunks
o
and
di
therefore
CD
is on the
nel
hard
Play 1.
drive many, many times. Marvel's Spider-Man uses this strategy, and though it works very well for increasing the streaming speed, there's a massive duplication as a result. Some of the objects like mailboxes or news racks are on the hard drive 400 times. What I'm describing here are things that cramp a creative director's style. Either level design gets a little bit boring in places, or the data is duplicated so many times that it no longer fits on the Blu-ray disc. And you end up with hard limits on the player's run speed or driving speed. The player can't go faster than the load speed from the hard drive. And finally, I'm sure many of you have noticed that after a patch download, a PlayStation 4 will sometimes take a long time to install the patch. That's because when just part of a file has been changed, the new data can be downloaded pretty quickly. But before the game boots up, a brand new file has to be constructed that includes the changed portion. Otherwise, every change would
Qua
add
spiega
a
perché
seek
ci
or
mettono
two.
tanto le installazioni dei
Even so,
download
you
delle
can
patch.
occasionally see this happening on game titles. They start to hitch once they get patched enough. With an SSD, though, no
Interessante.
seeks, so no need to make brand new files with the changes incorporated into them. which
Si
means
scaricano dei
no
pezzi di file
installs as
nuovi,
you know
però
them today.
devono essere integrati nel file
There's
vecchio,
yet
quindi deve
one
essere
more
riscritto
benefit, which is that
completamente.
system memory can be used much
Interessante.
more efficiently. On PlayStation 4, game data on the hard drive feels very distant and difficult to use. By the time you realize you need a piece of data, it's much too late to go out and load it. So system memory has to contain all of the data that could be used in the next 30 seconds or so of gameplay. That means a lot of the 8 gigabytes of system memory is idle. It's just waiting there to be potentially used. On PlayStation 5, though, the SSD is very close to being like more RAM.
16 giga?
Typically, it's fast enough that when you realize you
Per la
need a
PlayStation
piece of data,
5?
you can just load it from the
Interessante.
SSD and use it. There's no need to have lots of data parked in system memory waiting to potentially be used. A different way of saying that is that most of RAM is working on the game's behalf. This is one of the reasons that 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 feels right for PlayStation 5. The presence of the
Immagino il monaco che
SSD
dici come si
reduces the need
schippa.
for a massive
Sì, oh, ma il pubblico è
intergenerational increase
finto.
in size.
Palese
So,
che siano
back to
sagome.
the dream of the SSD.
No,
Here's
si
the
muovono un
set
po',
of
vedete?
targets. Boot
Adesso
the
si è
game in
mosso.
a second. No load screens. Design freedom, meaning no twisty passages or long
Quello in mezzo,
corridors.
diciamo.
More game on the disk and more game on the SSD. And finally, those patch installs go away. The reality, though, is that the SSD is just one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of places where bottlenecks can occur in between the SSD and the game code that uses the data. You can see this on PlayStation 4. If I use an SSD with 10 times the speed of a standard hard drive, I probably see only double the loading speed, if that. For PlayStation 5, our goal was not just that the SSD itself be 100 times faster. It was that game loads and streaming would be 100 times faster. So every single potential bottleneck needed to be addressed. And there are a lot of them. Let's look at check-in and what happens when its overhead gets 100 times larger. Conceptually, check-in is a pretty simple process. Data is loaded into system memory from the hard drive or SSD. It's examined, a few values are tweaked to check it in, and then it's moved to its final location. At the SSD speeds we're talking about, that last part, moving the data, meaning copying it from one location to another, takes roughly an entire next-gen CPU core. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. If all the overheads get 100 times larger, that will cripple the frame rate as soon as the player moves, and that massive stream of data starts coming off the SSD. So to solve all of that, we built a lot of custom hardware, namely a custom flash controller and a number of custom units in our main chip.
Sta parlando di cose molto,
The flash
molto
controller in the
specifiche.
SSD was designed for smooth and bottleneck-free operation, but also with games in mind. For example, there are
Però
6
sto spiegando
levels of
molto bene.
priority when reading from the SSD. Priority is very important. You can imagine the player heading into some new location in the world and the game requesting a few gigabytes of textures.
Niente
And
annuncio
while
ancora
those
per chi non
textures are
è,
being
per chi è appena
loaded,
arrivato.
an
Hanno
enemy
solo
is
accennato
shot
che avrà
and has
16
to
giga di
speak
RAM
a
la
few
PS5.
dying words. Having multiple priority levels lets the audio for those dying words get loaded immediately. On one side, that flash controller connects to the actual flash dies that supply the storage. To reach our bandwidth target of 5 gigabytes a second, we ended up with a 12-channel interface. 8 channels wouldn't be enough. The resulting bandwidth we've achieved is actually 5.5 gigabytes a second. With a 12-channel interface, the most natural size that emerges for an SSD is 825 gigabytes. The key question for us was, is that enough? I mean, it's tempting to add more, but flash certainly doesn't come cheap, and we have a responsibility to our gaming audience to be cost-effective with regards to what we put in the console. Ultimately, we resolved this question by looking at the play patterns of a broad range of gamers. We examined the specific games that they were playing over the course of a weekend or a week or a month, and whether that set of games would fit properly on the SSD. We were able to establish that the friction caused by reinstalls or redownloads would be quite low, and so we locked in on that 825 gigabyte size, while also preparing multiple strategies so that those who want more storage can add it.
Dio mio,
I'll go
quanto
through the
lento a spiegare
details
sto
in a
tipo.
moment.
Staremo qua per 6 ore.
Back to the flash controller. On the other side, it connects
Sì,
to our main
abbastanza-
custom chip via 4 lanes of Gen 4 PCIe. And inside the main custom chip is a pretty hefty unit dedicated to I/O. Before we talk about what that does, let's talk compression for a moment. PlayStation 4 used zlib as its compression format. We decided to use it
Preferisco guardare a
again on
loop quelli che
PlayStation
vendono i
5,
materassi in
but on
TV
my
su Mediaset.
2017 tour of developers, I learned about a new format called Kraken from Rad Game Tools. It's like zlib's smarter cousin. Simple, similar types of algorithms, but about 10% better compression, which is pretty big. That means 10% more game on the UHD Blu-ray disc or on the SSD. Kraken had only been out for a year, but it was already becoming a de facto industry standard. Half of the teams I talked to were either using it or getting ready to evaluate it. So we hustled and built a custom decompressor into the I/O unit, one capable of handling over 5 gigabytes of Kraken format input data a second. After decompression, that typically becomes 8 or 9 gigabytes, but the unit itself is capable of outputting as much as 22 gigabytes a second if the data happen to compress particularly well.
Comunque l'hard
By the way,
disk,
in terms of performance,
l'SSD
that
dovrebbe essere
custom
da
decompressor equates to
870
9 of our
megabyte.
Zen 2 cores. That's
Quindi
what it would
quasi
take to
un giga.
decompress the Kraken stream with a conventional CPU.
Ma non sarà
There's a
cambiabile
lot more
facilmente
in the
perché
custom
appunto
I/O
è
unit, including a dedicated
fatto in
DMA
modo
controller.
molto
The game
custom
can direct
questo SSD,
exactly
quindi
where it wants
sarà
to send the
saldato sulla
data
scheda
coming off
madre.
of the SSD. This equates to
La buona
another
notizia è che
Zen
i
2
giochi
core or
dovrebbero
2 in
essere
terms of its copy
meno...
performance. Its primary
dovrebbero
purpose is to
consumare meno
remove
spazio sull'hard
check-in as
disk.
a bottleneck. There's 2 dedicated I/O coprocessors and a large RAM pool. These aren't Zen 2 cores. They're there principally to direct the variety of custom hardware around them. One of the coprocessors is dedicated to SSD I/O. This lets us bypass traditional file I/O and its bottlenecks when reading from the SSD.
No, no,
The
Michele,
other is
lui,
responsible for memory mapping,
lui
which
è
I know
proprio
doesn't
l'architetto
sound
della
like anything
PS4
related to the
e
SSD,
della
but a lot of
PS5 e anche
developers
della
map and
PS4 Pro.
remap memory as part of
Quindi
file I/O, and this
li ha
too
proprio
can become a
cioè è lui l'ingegnere che le ha
There are
create,
coherency engines to assist the coprocessors.
progettate. come si dice.
Coherency comes up a lot in places. Probably the biggest coherency issue is stale data in the GPU caches. Flushing all of the GPU caches
Poteva
whenever
fare
the
un corso di
SSD is
communication
read
marketing.
is an unattractive option.
Poteva,
It could
sì.
really hurt the GPU performance. So we've implemented a gentler way of doing things, where the coherency engines inform the GPU of the overwritten address ranges, and custom scrubbers in several dozen GPU caches do pinpoint evictions of just those address ranges. The best thing is, as a game developer, when you read from the SSD, you don't need to know any of this. You don't even need to know that your data is compressed. You just indicate what data you'd like to read from your original uncompressed file and where you'd
Speriamo la
like to
lettera
put it,
totale,
and the
Bomber
whole
89.
process
Sì, mi
of
pare
loading
sia
it
già confermata.
happens invisibly to
Controllerò,
you
ma
and at very high speed.
è praticamente
Back to the
confermata.
dream. Thanks to all of that surrounding
Non solo sarà
hardware, our
compatibile, ma
5.5
gireranno meglio i
gigabytes a
giochi
second really should
PS4.
translate into something like 100 times faster I/O than PS4 and allow the dream of no load screens and super fast streaming to become a reality.
Qui stanno
Having
parlando di
said
tante
that,
cose nuove, ma
expandability of our
ancora
SSD
niente
is
di
going to
roba
be quite
grafica, cioè stanno
important.
solo parlando
Flash is
di
costly,
velocità
and
di
we may very well
caricamenti,
want to
di
add storage to whatever we
comodità
put
nel
in the
creare i
console.
file per il gioco.
Now, the kind of storage
Questi
you
fattori
need
qua.
depends on how you're going to use it. If you have an extensive PlayStation 4 library and you'd like to take advantage of backwards compatibility to play those games on PlayStation 5, then a large external hard drive is ideal. You can leave your games on the hard drive and play them directly from there, thus saving the pricier SSD storage for your PlayStation 5 titles, or you can copy your active PlayStation 4 titles to the SSD. If your purpose in adding more storage is to play PlayStation 5 titles, though, ideally you would add to your SSD storage. We will be supporting certain M2 SSDs. These are internal drives that you can get on the open market and install
Ok,
in a
certi
bay in the
SSD
PlayStation
saranno
5. As for
supportati.
which ones we support and when, I'll get to that in a moment. They
Quindi
connect through the custom
meglio
I/O
così.
unit, just like our SSD does. So they can take full advantage of the decompression, I/O coprocessors, and all the other features I was talking about. Here's the catch,
Abbassa il
though.
volume del tizio che
That
spiega, grazie.
commercial
Ok,
drive has to
scusate.
be at least as fast as ours. Games that rely on the speed of our SSD need to
Vediamo
work
se così va
flawlessly
meglio.
with any M2 drive. When I gave the Wired interview last year, I said that the PlayStation 5 SSD was faster than anything available on PC. At the time, commercial M2 drives used PCIe 3.0, and 4 lanes of that cap out at 3.5 gigabytes a second. In other words, no
Sembra il robot del
PCIe
tutorial di quei
3.0
giochi
drive
vecchi
can
che ti
hit
spiega
the
come usare le
required
abilità e
spec.
le mosse.
M2 drives with PCIe 4.0 are now out in the market. We're getting samples and seeing 4 or 5 gigabytes a second from them. By year's end, I expect there will be drives that saturate 4.0 and support 7 gigabytes a second. Having said that, we are comparing apples and oranges, though, because that commercial M2 drive will have its own architecture, its own flash controller, and so on. For example, the NVMe specification lays out a priority scheme for requests that the M2 drives can use. And that scheme is pretty nice.
Ok, sta
but
dicendo che verso
it
fine
only
anno
has
dovrebbero
2
uscire
true priority levels.
dei nuovi
Our drive
SSD
supports 6.
che
We can hook up
andranno
the
ancora
drive
più
with only
veloci
2
degli
priority
SSD
levels,
nella
definitely, but our
PS5,
custom
che sono
I/O
più
unit has
veloci,
to arbitrate the extra
quelli della
priority,
PS5 sono più veloci di
rather
quelli
than
che
the
sono in
M2
commercio
drive's flash
adesso.
controller. And so
Quelli che
the
arrivano a
M2
fine anno
drive
dovrebbero
needs
essere
a
ancora più
little
veloci in
extra
termini
speed
di
to take
velocità,
care of
proprio
issues arising from the different approach.
semplice velocità, pura
That
velocità.
commercial drive
Però,
also needs to physically fit inside of the bay we created
però
in
lui
PlayStation
dice
5
è come
for M2 drives.
comparare mele
Unlike
con
internal
arance
hard
perché
drives, there's unfortunately
c'è
no
proprio
standard
un'architettura
for the height
dell'SSD
of an
che è
M2
concepito
drive. And
per
some M2
funzionare
drives have
velocemente con la
giant heat sinks.
PS5.
In fact, some of them even
Quindi,
have their own fans.
pur essendo la velocità
Right
maggiore di
now,
questi
we're
nuovi
getting M2
SSD, non
drive
è detto
samples
che
and
renderanno
benchmarking them
meglio,
in various
anzi.
ways. When games hit beta as they get ready for the PlayStation 5 launch at year end, we'll also be doing some compatibility testing to make sure that the architecture of particular M2 drives isn't too foreign for the games to handle. Once we've done that compatibility testing, we should be able to start letting you know which drives will physically fit and which drive samples have benchmarked appropriately high.
Ok, faranno dei test con
It would be
gli
great if that happened
SSD
by launch, but it's likely to be a
compatibili
bit past it. So please hold off on getting that M2 drive
con la
until you hear
PS5.
from us. Okay,
Lo faranno
back to
sapere
our
un po' dopo il
principles.
lancio,
Balancing
perché
evolution
devono fare
and
dei test per
revolution is the
vedere
second of them.
se
This was definitely a recurring theme with the
riescono
GPU.
a installare
We
probabilmente dei
need new
driver
GPU
per
features and capabilities.
garantire la
If we
compatibilità
only
senza
have more
che
performance, it's
si
not really a
comprometta
new
la qualità
generation
del
of
gioco.
console. Of course, many of these
Perché
capabilities
ovviamente anche
result
i
in more
giochi che
performance.
usciranno
That's
su PS5
part
saranno
of why a
costruiti
PlayStation
per
5
questo hard
teraflop is
drive,
more powerful than
per
a
questo SSD.
PlayStation 4 teraflop. But we aren't just looking for the performance. We also need the ability to do something with the GPU that could not have been done before. And we need higher performance for what? Every
No,
time
non
we
hanno
double
annunciato
the
giochi
performance of
e
some
non penso che lo
GPU
faranno oggi.
component,
Stanno
we
parlando di
don't
cose
want to find
estremamente
out we've doubled
tecniche.
the power consumed and the heat produced. But at the same time, we have to make sure the GPU can run PS4 games, and we have to ensure that the architecture is easy for the developers to adopt. Now, backwards compatibility was handled masterfully by AMD. They treated it as a key need throughout the design process. As our solution to adding new features without blindsiding developers, we made sure that if there were new significant features, it would be optional to use them. The GPU supports ray tracing, but you don't have to use ray tracing to make your game. The GPU supports primitive shaders, but you can release your first game on PlayStation 5 without making any use of them. Before I get into the capabilities of the GPU, I'd like to make clear 2 points that can be quite confusing. First, we have a custom AMD GPU based on their RDNA 2 technology. What does that mean? AMD is continuously improving and revising their tech. For RDNA 2,
PS3 non hanno
their
ancora
goals
detto.
were, roughly speaking,
Non
to
è
reduce
assicurato.
power consumption by re-architecting
Vedremo,
the GPU
potrebbe
to
ancora
put data
arrivare,
close to
semplicemente
where it's needed,
non lo annunciano
to
finché non sono
optimize the
sicuri.
GPU for
Ma secondo me
performance, and to
basterebbe un
adding new,
semplicissimo
more
emulatore.
advanced feature set. But that feature set is malleable, which is to say that we have our own needs for PlayStation, and that can factor into what the AMD roadmap becomes. So collaboration is born. If we bring concepts to AMD that are felt to be widely useful, then they can be adopted into RDNA 2 and used broadly, including in PC GPUs. If the ideas are sufficiently specific to what we're trying to accomplish, like the GPU cache scrubbers I was talking about, then they end up being just for us. If you see a similar discrete GPU available as a PC card at roughly the same time as we release our console, that means our collaboration with AMD succeeded in producing technology useful in both worlds. It doesn't mean that we as Sony simply incorporated the PC part into our console. This continuous improvement
Quanti
in
crediti
AMD
sono l'esame alla
technology
fine?
means dangerous
Stai
to
prendendo
rely on
appunti, Cornel.
teraflops as an absolute indicator of performance, and CU count should be avoided as well. In the case of CPUs, we all understand this. The PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 each have 8 CPUs, but we never think that meant the capabilities and performance
In
are
fondo non mi
equal.
interessa una versione
It's
simile
the same for
masterizzata, ma avere
CUs.
un'unica
For one thing, they've been getting much
piattaforma
larger
che
over
faccia
time.
tutto.
Adding new features
Sì.
means adding lots of transistors. In fact, the transistor count for a PlayStation 5 CU is 62% larger than the transistor count for a PlayStation 4.
Diciamo che stanno...
Second, the PlayStation 5 GPU is backwards compatible with PlayStation 4. What does that mean?
Stanno puntando tanto su
One
quanti
way
hanno
you can
preso la
achieve
PS4,
backwards
perché la PS4 ha
compatibility
venduto
is to
veramente
put
un
the
macello.
previous console's chipset in the new console, like we did with some PlayStation 3s. But that's, of
Attenzione.
course, extremely expensive. A better way is to incorporate any differences in the previous console's logic into the new console's custom chips, meaning that even as the technology evolves, the logic and feature set that PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro titles rely on is still available in backwards compatibility modes. One advantage of this strategy is that once backwards compatibility is in the console, it's in. It's not as if a cost down will remove backwards compatibility like it did on PlayStation 3. Achieving this unification of functionality took years of efforts by AMD, as any roadmap advancement creates a potential divergence in logic. Running PS4 and PS4 titles at boosted frequencies has also added complexity. The boost is truly massive this time around, and some game code just can't handle it. Testing has to be done on a title-by-title basis. Results are excellent, though. We recently took a look at the top 100 PlayStation 4 titles as ranked by playtime, and we're expecting almost all of them to be playable at launch on PlayStation 5.
Ok, devono fare dei test per la
as I said, our
retrocompatibilità con la
strategy was to try to
PS4,
break new ground, but at the same time not
perché
to
il
require
cambiamento di
use of the new
hardware è
GPU
abbastanza
capabilities.
importante e non tutti i
For
giochi
more than a
possono
decade, GPUs have
automaticamente
imposed a
adattarsi.
restriction on game engines. Software
Consideriamo che
handles
sono
vertex
giochi fatti per
processing,
una
but for the
specifica
most part,
piattaforma,
dedicated
non
hardware is responsible
giochi per
for the
PC che
triangles
vanno
and
bene
other
più o meno, se hai un
geometry
PC
that
più
the vertices
potente di
form.
un altro
That
funziona lo
means
stesso.
it's not
Non è
possible to
sta
do
cosa.
even basic optimizations, such as aborting processing of a vertex if all geometry that uses it is off-screen. PlayStation 5 has a new unit called the Geometry Engine, which brings handling of triangles and other primitives under full programmatic control. As a game developer, you're free to ignore its existence and use the PlayStation 5 GPU as if it were no more capable than the PS4 GPU, or you can
Peggio
use
di
this
Benigni
new
con la Divina
intelligence in
Commedia.
various ways. Simple usage could be performance optimization, such as removing backfaced or off-screen vertices and triangles. More complex usage involves something called primitive shaders, which allow the game to synthesize geometry on the fly as it's being rendered. It's a brand new capability. Using primitive shaders on PlayStation 5 will allow for a broad variety of techniques, including smoothly varying level of detail, addition of procedural detail to close-up
Non so
objects,
abbastanza
and
cose sugli
improvements to
shader
particle
per
effects and
capire
other
perfettamente di cosa sta
visual
parlando.
special effects. Another major new feature of our custom RDNA
Ray tracing
2-based
però va
GPU
bene.
is ray tracing, using the same strategy as AMD's upcoming PC GPUs. The CUs contain a new specialized unit called the intersection engine, which can calculate the intersection of rays with boxes and triangles. To use the intersection engine, first you build what is called an acceleration structure. It's data in RAM that contains all of your geometry. There's a specific set of formats you can use. They're variations on the same BVH concept. Then, in your shader program, you use a new instruction that asks the intersection engine to check a ray against the BVH.
Va bene.
While the intersection engine
Sta
is
complicando
processing the
tantissimo
requested ray
una cosa
triangle or ray box
semplicissima come ray
intersections, the
tracing.
shaders are free to do other work. Having said that, the ray tracing instruction is pretty memory intensive, so it's a good mix with logic-heavy code. There's of course no need to use ray tracing. PS4 graphics engines will run
Sto
just
sfigato
fine
Stefano,
on
è
PlayStation
l'architetto
5.
della
But
PS4.
it presents an opportunity for those interested. I'm thinking it'll take less than 1 million rays a second to have a big impact on audio. That should be enough for audio occlusion and some reverb calculations. With a bit more of the GPU invested in ray tracing, it should be possible to do some very nice global illumination. Having said that, adding ray-traced shadows and reflections to a traditional graphics engine could easily take hundreds of millions of rays a second, and full ray tracing could take billions. How far can we go? I'm starting to get quite bullish. I've already seen a PlayStation 5 title that's successfully using ray tracing-based reflections in complex animated scenes with only modest costs. Another set of issues for the GPU involved size and frequency. How big do we make the GPU, and what frequency do we run it at? This is a balancing act. The chip has a cost, and there's a cost for whatever we use to supply that chip with power and to cool it. In general, I
Mi
like
sarei dovuto
running
ascoltare
the
lui
GPU
che diceva
at
tutte queste
higher
cose e avrei
frequency. Let
dovuto
me show
prendere
you why.
appunti.
Here's two possible configurations for a GPU roughly of the level of the PlayStation 4 Pro. This is a thought experiment. Don't take these configurations too seriously. If you just calculate teraflops, you get the same number. But actually, the performance is noticeably different because teraflops is defined as the computational capability of the vector ALU. That's just one part of the GPU. There are a lot of other units. And those other units all run faster when the GPU frequency is higher. At 33% higher frequency, rasterization goes 33% faster. Processing the command buffer goes
Secondo me Dani dovrebbe dire Cyberpunk 2077 con il sottofondo da YouTuber.
And so on. About the only downside is that system memory is 33% further away in terms of cycles. But the large number of benefits more than counterbalance that.
Scommetto
As a
che non
friend of
c'è
mine
la
says,
che
a
ho
rising
preso
tide
sto
lifts
spiegato.
all boats. Also, it's easier to fully use 36 CUs in parallel than it is to fully use 48 CUs. When triangles are small, it's much harder to fill all those CUs with useful work. So there's a lot to be said for faster, assuming you can handle the resulting power
Avrebbero
and
potuto
heat
renderla un po' più
issues,
vivace
which
questa
frankly,
cosa. Sapevano che avrebbero guardato
always done
tutti.
the best job at. Part of the reason for that is, historically, our process
Un po'
for
più
setting
divulgativo,
CPU and
ecco, il
GPU
tono.
frequencies has
Forse era
relied on
meglio.
some heavy-duty guesswork with regards to how much electrical power games will consume and how much heat will be produced as a result inside of the console. Power consumption varies a lot from game to game. When I play God of War on my PS4 Pro, I know the power consumption is high just by the fan noise. But power isn't simply about engine quality. It's about the minutiae of what's being displayed and how. It's counterintuitive, but processing dense geometry typically consumes less power than processing simple geometry, which is, I suspect, why Horizon's map screen, with its low triangle count, makes my PS4 Pro heat up so much. Our process on previous consoles has been to try to guess what the maximum power consumption during the entire console lifetime might be, which is to say, the worst case scene in the worst case game, and prepare a cooling solution that we think will be quiet at that power level. If we get it right, fan noise is minimal. If we get it wrong, the console will be quite loud for the higher power games, and there's even a chance that it might overheat and shut down if we misestimate power too
Death Stranding
badly.
uscirà nel 2019.
PlayStation 5 is especially challenging because the CPU supports 256-bit native instructions.
Tra
that
l'altro non l'ho
consume
ancora
a
detto
lot
su
of
questo
power.
canale, Death Stranding mi
These
è
are
piaciuto
great here and
tantissimo.
there, but presumably only minimally used. Or are they? If we plan for major 256-bit instruction usage, we need to set the CPU clock substantially lower or noticeably increase the size of the power supply and fan. So, after much discussion, we decided to go with a very different direction on PlayStation 5. We built a GPU with 36 CUs. Mind you, RDNA 2 CUs are large. Each has 62% more transistors than the CUs we were using on PlayStation 4. So if we compare transistor counts, 36 RDNA 2 CUs equates to roughly 58 PlayStation 4 CUs. It is a fairly sizable GPU. Then we went with a variable frequency strategy for PlayStation 5, which is to say we continuously run the GPU and CPU in boost mode. We supply a generous amount of electrical power and then increase the frequency of GPU and CPU until they reach the capabilities of the system's cooling solution. It's a completely different paradigm. Rather than running at constant frequency and letting power vary based on the workload, we run at essentially constant power and let the frequency vary based on the workload. We then tackled the engineering challenge of a cost-effective and high-performance cooling solution designed for that specific power level. In some ways, it becomes a simpler problem because there are no more unknowns. There's no need to guess what power consumption the worst-case game might have. As for the details of the cooling solution, we're saving them for our teardown. I think you'll be quite happy with what the engineering team came up with. So how fast can we run the GPU and CPU with this strategy? The simplest approach would be to look at the actual temperature of the silicon die and throttle the frequency on that basis. But that won't work. It fails to create a consistent PlayStation 5 experience. It wouldn't do to run a console slower simply because it was in a hot room. So rather than look at the actual temperature of the silicon die, we look at the activities that the GPU and CPU are performing and set the frequencies on that basis, which makes everything deterministic and repeatable. While we're at it, we also use AMD's Smart Shift technology and send any unused power from the CPU to the GPU so it can squeeze out a few more pixels. The benefits of this strategy are quite large. Running a GPU at 2 gigahertz was looking like an unreachable target with the old fixed frequency strategy. With this new paradigm, we're able to run way over that. In fact, we have to cap the GPU frequency at 2.23 gigahertz so that we can guarantee that the on-chip logic operates properly. 36 CUs at 2.23 gigahertz is 10.3 teraflops, and we expect the GPU to spend most of its time at or close to that frequency and performance.
10.3
Similarly,
teraflops.
running the CPU at 3 gigahertz was causing headaches with the old strategy. But now we can run it as high as 3.5 gigahertz. In fact, it spends most of its time at that frequency. That doesn't mean all games will be running at 2.23 gigahertz and 3.5 gigahertz. When that worst-case game arrives, it will run at a lower clock speed.
Ok, ha parlato di
but
frequenze
not too much
variabili
lower.
sia per
To
la
reduce
CPU che
power
per
by
la
10%,
GPU.
it only takes a couple of percent reduction in frequency. So I'd expect any downclocking to be pretty
E ha detto
minor.
prima che anche i teraflops
All
non
things
sono
considered,
l'unica
the change
misura
to a
per
variable
una
frequency
scheda video,
approach
quindi
will show significant gains for PlayStation gamers. The final of our 3 principles was about finding
guardare i
new
numeri non
dreams.
sempre dalle
It's
risposte,
important for
perché
us on the hardware team to find
è
new
tutto
ways to
una-
expand or deepen gaming.
è tutto
and
un
that's what
ecosistema
led us to a
costruito
focus
attorno
on
a
3D
quella
audio.
GPU, a quella CPU.
As players, we experience the game through the visuals, through audio, and through the feedback we receive from the controller, such as rumble or haptics. Personally, I feel a game is just dead without audio. Visuals are, of course, important, but the impact of audio is huge as well. At the same time, the audio team on a game project has to do a lot with a little. For example, on PlayStation 4, there's fierce competition for the Jaguar CPU cores. Audio typically ends up getting just a fraction of a core. That's not much of a computational resource, particularly when you consider that the visuals run at 30 or 60 frames a second, but audio processing needs to happen at almost 200 times a second. So it's been tough going making forward progress on audio with PlayStation 4, particularly when PlayStation 3 was such a beast when it came to audio. The SPUs in Cell were almost a perfect device for audio rendering. Simple pipelined algorithms could really take advantage of asynchronous DMA and frequently reached 100% utilization of the floating point unit. There's unfortunately nothing comparable on PlayStation 4. Probably the most dramatic progress in the PlayStation 4 generation has been with virtual reality. The PSVR hardware has its own audio unit. It supports about 50 pretty decent 3D sound sources. And this provided a hint as to where we could go with audio, as well as some valuable experience. Not to oversimplify, but here were our goals for audio on PlayStation 5. The first goal was great audio for everyone, not just VR users or soundbar owners or headphone users. That meant audio had to be part of the console. It couldn't be a peripheral. The second goal was to support
Why are we
hundreds
still
of sound
here
sources.
just to suffer?
We didn't want developers
Vittorio
to
che
have to
cita
pick
Metal
and
Gear
choose
Solid.
what sounds would get 3D effects and which wouldn't. We wanted every sound in the game to have dimensionality. And finally, we wanted to
Se
really
qualcuno di
take
voi
on
è
the
curioso,
challenges
sta
of
parlando del
presence
fatto che
and
sulla
locality.
PS4
Now, when we say presence, we mean the feeling
l'audio
that you're
si
actually
beccava
there.
solo
You've entered
una
the
frazione di
matrix.
core.
It's not, of course, something we thought we could perfectly achieve, but the idea was that if we stopped using just a rain sound and instead used lots of 3D audio sources for raindrops hitting the ground at all sorts of locations around you, then at some point your brain would take a leap and you'd begin to have this feeling of real presence inside the virtual world of the game. This has the capacity to affect your appreciation of the
Mentre
game,
sulla PS3
just
i
like
core
music
dell'audio erano
in a game does.
molto meglio
The concept of
distribuiti.
locality
E anche
is
sul
simpler. It's
PSVR.
just your sense of where the audio
Sulla
is coming
PS5
from.
vogliono fare
To the
un
right
bel
of you,
balzo
behind
avanti
you,
nella,
above you.
non
This
solo
can
qualità
immerse you
dell'audio,
further
ma
in the
nel,
game, and it can also directly enhance the gameplay. To use
nella
Dead
costruzione
Space
dell'audio
as an
come
example,
oggetti
I know, old
separati,
school. You're fighting enemies in
che danno
fairly
più un
dark,
senso di
spooky
immersione rispetto a
locations.
un file audio
Back in the
con...
day, if you played
Faccio
the
l'esempio
game
l'effetto
using the
della
TV
pioggia.
speakers, you could tell that there was one last enemy growling and hunting you down, but it was difficult to tell quite where that
Sembra che
enemy
stia
was.
spiegando come funziona un
With
missile per
headphones, you
andare
could tell
nello
that the enemy
spazio.
was somewhere on the right, which lets you deduce, if you couldn't see it, that it must be somewhere behind and to your right. But with 3D audio with good locality, the idea is you know the enemy is precisely there, and you turn and you take it out. So, how do we know where a sound is coming from in the first place? Well, all those bumps and folds in the ear have a meaning.
Oh mio Dio, sta
evolutionarily
spiegando come
speaking.
funziona
Based on
l'orecchio.
what direction the sound is coming from, sound waves bounce around inside the ear, there's some constructive and destructive interference, and the result is a change in volume.
Non ci
The
credo,
phase of the
ragazzi.
sound also shifts, depending on what path the sound wave took to reach
Sembra
the
una
ear
parodia.
canal. These volume changes and phase shifts are different for each direction and also vary depending on the frequency of the sound. Head size and head shape also impact the sound in a similar fashion. The way that the sound changes, based
Oh,
on
grazie.
direction and
Che bel
frequency, can be
grafico.
encoded in a table called the head-related transfer function, or
Scusate, è veramente
HRTF.
imbarazzante
Here's
sta
part of
cosa.
one. The vertical axis is the frequency. The horizontal axis
Grazie.
is the direction, front, back, left, right, and the color gives the degree of attenuation of the sound at that frequency. The HRTF is as unique to an individual as a fingerprint is. In fact, you're looking at mine right now. Here's how we measure an HRTF. We've taken hundreds of people through this process. We put a microphone in the subject's left and right ear canals, and then sit the subject down in the middle of an array of 22 speakers. We then play an audio sweep from each speaker as we rotate the subject. In the course of 10 or 20 minutes, we're able to sample the HRTF at over 1,000 locations.
Ok, era
Using an
costruito...
HRTF when rendering audio creates unparalleled quality, but it's computationally expensive. The simplest way to use an HRTF is to process a sound source to make it appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 locations we sample. Unfortunately,
Dico,
the
Dio,
processing has to be
fai
done in
grazie.
frequency domain rather than time domain, so there's multiple fast Fourier
Insomma,
transforms
seconda laurea
needed for
quando
every
neanche
sound
volevo
source
la
for every
prima.
audio tune. That's
Esatto.
a lot of multipliers.
Ora manca solo che spieghi il
This
bilanciamento degli
computational
elettroni in
complexity was the
fisica.
determining
tutto.
factor for our strategy. It meant we had to bite the bullet and design and build a custom hardware
misurare
unit
che
for
cosa?
streaming audio. Collectively,
Praticamente hanno fatto dei test in base a come l'orecchio funziona, hanno fatto degli algoritmi per fare l'audio 3D della PlayStation 5, praticamente. È una cosa bella, non dico di no, cioè, se è fatto bene l'audio io sono il primo a dire sì, però parlarne per 10 minuti, non so, 20 minuti, quanto ne sto parlando?
It's based on AMD's GPU technology. We modified a compute unit in such a way as to make it very close to the SPUs in PlayStation 3. Remember when I said that they were ideal for
poi
audio?
come la compri non si
So
accende.
the Tempest engine has no caches, just like an SPU. All data access is via DMA, just like an SPU. Our target was that it would have more power than a CPU, thanks to the parallelism that a GPU can achieve, and that it would be more efficient than our GPU, thanks to the SPU-like architecture. The goal being to make possible near 100% utilization of the CU's vector units.
Ok,
Where we
interessante
ended
questa cosa
up is a unit
dell'audio,
with
però
roughly the same SIMD power and bandwidth as all 8 Jaguar cores in the PlayStation 4 combined.
avrebbero potuto fare una conferenza più divulgativa
That's enough for something like 5,000 sound
poi
sources.
farne
But of course,
un'altra a porte
we want
chiuse
to
per gli
use more
esperti, per
complex
gli sviluppatori
algorithms,
che
and we
dovevano
don't need
sfruttare
anything
queste cose e
like
spiegare
that
tutti i
number
dettagli,
of sounds.
secondo me. Farla così
It
è...
would have been
boh.
wonderful if a simpler strategy, such as using Dolby Atmos peripherals, could have achieved our goals, but we wanted 3D audio for all, not just those with licensed soundbars.
Parallelismo della GPU,
Also, we
nuova
wanted
forma
many
filosofica
hundreds
del
of
fatto
sound
che una
sources, not
GPU
just the 32
si trova
that
parallela alla
Atmos
GPU della
supports.
versione
And finally,
precedente.
we wanted to be able to throw an overwhelming amount of processing power at the problem, and it wasn't clear what any peripheral might have inside of it. In fact, with the Tempest engine, we've even got enough power that we can allocate some to the games, to the extent that games want to make use of convolution reverb and other algorithms that are either computationally expensive or need high bandwidth. But the
Ok,
primary
in poche
purpose
parole hanno
of the
creato una
Tempest
tecnologia
engine
fighissima che
remains
fa tutte queste
3D
cose
audio.
del 3D audio senza neanche
Now,
consumare tanta
3D
potenza.
audio is a major academic research topic. It's safe to say that no one in the world has all of the answers. And the set of algorithms that has to be invented, tuned, or implemented to realize our vision for 3D audio is immense. For example, use of HRTFs in games is quite complex. Before, I talked about making a sound source appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 HRTF sample locations. But for high-quality 3D game audio, we have to handle other possibilities. The sound source might not be at one of the 1,000 HRTF sample locations, so we have to blend the HRTF data from the closest locations that we have sampled. The sound source might be moving, which needs very special handling as that blend keeps changing, and that can cause phase artifacts in the resulting audio. Or the sound source might have a size to it, meaning it should feel as if it's coming from an area rather than a single point. There's also whole categories of approaches to be handled. 3D audio can be implemented using individual processing.
Secondo me tra un po'
3D sound
inquadrano la
sources.
folla e sono tutte le
But
sedie vuote.
alternatively, ambisonics can be used for 3D audio. Ambisonics being somewhat like the spherical harmonics used in computer graphics. And finally, there's audio devices. The player might be using headphones or TV speakers or have a higher-end surround sound setup with 6 or more speakers, all of which need different approaches.
Comando prima di
That's a
giocare.
lot of variations. It's nice to have the computational resources of the Tempest engine, but it's clear
Mi
that
raccomando,
achieving
prima
our
di giocare alla
ultimate
Play
goals with
dovete
3D
sapere
audio
queste
is going
cose.
to be a multi-year, step-by-step
Le
process.
armoniche, ma sono matti.
Having said that, headphone audio implementation is largely complete at this time. It was a natural place for us to start. With headphones, we control exactly what each ear hears, and therefore the algorithmic development and implementation are more straightforward. For TV speakers and stereo speakers, we're in the process of implementing virtual surround sound. The idea being that if you're sitting in a
Ci sarà
sweet
questa
spot in front of the
presentazione.
TV, then the sound can be made to feel as if it's coming from any direction, even behind you. Virtual surround sound has a lot in common with 3D audio on headphones, but it's more complex because the left ear can hear the right speaker and vice versa. We have a basic implementation of virtual surround sound up and running. We're now looking at increasing the size of that sweet spot, which is to say, making the area you need to be in to feel the 3D effect larger, and we're also working to boost the sense of locality. Headphone audio is the current gold standard for 3D audio on PlayStation 5, but we're going to see what we can do to bring virtual surround
Rompe peggio
sound
del
to a
coronavirus
similar
in questo
level,
momento.
after which we'll start in on setups with more speakers, such as 6-channel surround sound. It's now to the point where some of the PlayStation 5 games in development are extensively using these systems. One of the game demos allows you to toggle between conventional PlayStation 4-style stereo audio and our new 3D audio. I listened with just an ordinary pair of over-the-ear headphones, and wow, I could feel a difference. 3D audio has that dimensional feel to it. Conventional stereo audio feels smashed flat by comparison. The improvement is obvious. So, a big advancement, but have I
Questo lo sanno
entered
tutti
Matrix?
secondo
Does
me.
my brain believe I'm really there?
Non stavo
Like
spiegando
I was
come mettere
talking
le
about
cause
earlier when I explained
case
our
stereo.
target of presence. Well, the answer is no, but you've probably caught on to what's missing here, namely whose HRTF was being used. It wasn't mine, it was the default HRTF. The audio team analyzed the
Altri
hundreds that
grafici,
they measured
ragazzi.
and chose the one they felt was the closest fit to the total game-playing audience. This shows a piece of the default
Sapete come si
HRTF
chiamerà il mio
on the
prossimo
left,
video?
and my HRTF
Come non
on the
fare una
right. You can see
conferenza.
that the general features are much the same, but the details are quite different. With the default HRTF, as I said, the 3D audio sounds pretty great. When I use my HRTF, though, the audio reaches a higher level of realism, which is to say that when using headphones and my HRTF, I occasionally get fooled and even think a sound is coming from the real world when it's actually coming from the game. A corollary to this is that there are a few people whose HRTFs are sufficiently far from the default HRTF, that's the red dot here, that they can toggle between PS4 style and PS5 style audio and not sense much difference. I've had a few people describe the PlayStation 5's 3D audio as sounding like a bit better stereo audio. Presumably they're the ones at the very edges of this diagram. Which means what HRTF you're using is key. I'd like everyone to be able to experience what I'm experiencing, but obviously it's not possible to measure the HRTF of every PlayStation user. That means HRTF selection and synthesis are going to be big topics going forward as the Tempest technology matures. At PlayStation 5 launch, we'll be offering a choice of 5 HRTFs. There's a simple test where you pick the one that gives you the best locality. That's just the first step, though. This is an open-ended research topic. Maybe you'll be sending us a photo of your ear, and we'll choose a neural network to pick the closest HRTF in our library. Maybe you'll be sending us a video of your ears and your head, and we'll make a 3D model of them and synthesize the HRTF.
Scrivete a sto tizio che la
Maybe
gente
you'll
sta
play an
uscendo di
audio
casa.
wave to tune your HRTF. We'll be subtly changing it as you play and home in
Ma per la
on the
PS4 avevano
HRTF
fatto una
that
cosa
gives you the
simile, ma
highest
era solo
score,
per tecnici,
meaning
giusto?
that it matches you the best.
Allora,
This
mi
is
pare
a
di sì,
journey
o
we'll all
meglio,
be taking together over the next few years. Ultimately, we're committing
la
to
conferenza
enabling
corrispondente a
everyone to
questa di
experience
oggi
that next
era
level
molto più
of
divulgativa,
realism.
molto meno specifica.
Hopefully, I've been able to illustrate a bit about our design and decision-making process today and why PlayStation 5 has the feature set that it does. Now comes the fun part. We get to see how the development community takes advantage of that feature set. I'm hoping for the completely unexpected. Will it come from audio, ray tracing, the capabilities of the SSD, or something else? I guess
Diciamo
we'll
che
find
sì,
out soon enough.
perché questo presentatore non si è preso il
Thank you
coronavirus.
for your
Cosa-
time today.
Chissà quando l'hanno registrato questo. Magari la settimana fa. Wow! Bene. Che... non so che dire. Imbarazzante, cioè. Vabbè. Sì, insomma, ha parlato un po' molto nello specifico del perché hanno fatto certe scelte di design, perché hanno reputato l'audio importante, perché è come e il perché hanno scelto un SSD e perché hanno scelto di fare un design specifico per l'SSD. Quella parte era anche interessante. Però sì, decisamente troppo nello specifico, troppo tecnico, troppo poco divulgativo, oserei dire troppo poco interessante. Ehm, ha confermato la compatibilità con la PS4 almeno, sì, è vero, sì, quello sì, dai. Ehm, ha detto che ci saranno dei test da fare, quindi sulla compatibilità con i giochi PS3, PS2, PS1 non ci metterei la mano sul fuoco, però è anche vero che in quel caso parliamo di console molto meno potenti, quindi c'è molto meno da testare sulla compatibilità, ehm, perché in quel caso basta che gli butti un po' tot potenza in più di quanto è necessario e dovrebbe funzionare bene tutto. Potrebbero anche pagare una licenza a quelli che hanno sviluppato gli emulatori su PC per tutti questi anni e loro hanno già fatto i test con con tutti i giochi delle console. Funzionano alla grande ormai. E boh. Vedremo. Ho paura che sarà la compatibilità solo con i giochi PS4. Ehm, Purtroppo, almeno al lancio. Secondo me, se la gente lo chiede abbastanza su internet, su Twitter, sui forum, potrebbero mobilitarsi per fare la compatibilità con i giochi precedenti. Sarebbe bello avere una console come ha fatto l'Xbox, come ha fatto la Microsoft con l'Xbox One X, avere una console che ti fa girare tutti i giochi di tutta la famiglia di quelle console. Una console che fa tutto. Vedremo. Ehm, Grazie di essere stati qua. Se avessi saputo che la conferenza sarebbe stata così, forse non avrei neanche fatto la live. Me la sei guardata per conto mio e a un'ora molto più tarda in cui avevo bisogno di addormentarmi. Ci vedremo presto con nuovi video. Magari il primo sarà proprio su questa conferenza, sul come non fare una presentazione, ecco, della PS5. Vabbè. Grazie comunque a tutti di aver partecipato. Ci vediamo alla prossima.